Good evening. My name is Devin Smith, a junior business finance major, Spanish minor from Amber, Pennsylvania, currently studying at Morehouse College. Recently, I read the article Private Equity and Workers' Career Paths: The Role of Technological Change. This article speaks specifically about the private equity industry. Over the past couple of years, the private equity industry has really evolved from an industry that is looking at large LBOs to that require a lot of debt to an industry that is primarily looking to use sometimes even more equity than leverage in this day and age. A lot of these companies have a lot of dry powder, which is essentially money that is sitting on their balance sheet that they have not deployed through their funds. Because of this large amount of dry powder or free cash that they have, they're looking to use more of that to obtain and really meet all of their necessary goals for their funds. So not only is the private equity industry ever changing as are most alternative industries, there's also the issue with the sort of the private equity acquisition itself and how it is a catalyst for the major changes in the trajectory of the firm. One of the key points and one of the issues that a lot of people are dealing with in the private equity industry nowadays is the fact that many private equity companies come in and completely restructure companies post acquisition. One of these strategies can be through looking at layoffs, wage reductions, or even changes in working conditions. That could be changes in factory conditions, changing in manufacturing, changing in anything from a front office all the way to the back office. A lot of those things are subject to change when we're looking at private equity investments specifically. As a result, a lot of people are skeptical as to the humane and good efforts that private equity firms are actually employing. So when we look at an LBO deal, the traditional LBO deal takes roughly 1 year. Private equity firms look to solicit different potential companies or acquisition companies from individuals or from investment banks. These investment banks then pitch the idea. If the private equity firm is content with the idea, they'll then move forward into the due diligence process. The due diligence process is the process in which the private equity firm will actually go to on-site visits, analyze the different balance sheets, the balance sheet, the income statement, all the various financial statements of the PE firm, while also making sure that this is a viable option for their company, making sure that it fits within their mandate of the fund, and making sure that they have a strategic exit strategy that will allow them to realize all potential capital. That being said, once the private equity firm completes the due diligence, they then move into the financing component of the deal. The financing component of the deal is when they look to see how much leverage they can use, how much equity they need to use, what the proper balance is to achieve the highest possible return while minimizing and mitigating the most risk. With once that occurs and the deal moves into closing and they come into an agreement and moves into escrow and everything finishes up, that's when the private equity firm can actually move in and begin to implement their various changes. This can be shown and through the research that we see in this article that the ideal experiment for our exercise it was to measure the long-run labor market outcomes of an individual employed by a target firm at the time of an LBO and compare how these outcomes affect the counterfactual outcomes that the individual would have realized in the absence of an LBO. Essentially, what this means in layman's terms is that the best sample is one where you can choose two similar companies, comps as we refer to them in the industry as, and you can look at one that is acquired by an LBO firm such as a Blackstone, KKR, Carlyle Group, and you can look at one who is not. You want to analyze and understand how the employees' work conditions, work habits, ethics, anything would have changed post or pre LBO, right? Or in the absence of an LBO in this case. So we want to understand how you can divide the sample of the individuals into treatment and control groups based on the following criteria. You want to see if a resume indicates that an individual is currently or previously has been employed at a firm that has gone under an LBO. We also want to understand that there is also a trait group that is more likely aligned with a worker who was not influenced by an LBO but is in a similar company. Let's say, for instance, we had two large manufacturing companies. One was a target of an LBO, one was not. It was simply run by management for years and years to come. They have no desire in selling, merging, or acquiring, or being a target of an LBO. An employee's career trajectory could be completely different in those situations. Usually, private equity firms look to cut costs to maximize net income. That net income is then realized at the end, which is then funneled back into their funds and given to their consumers and customers in the form of a dividend. With that being said, those cutting costs is what the real target and real issue is. The sample set that was used in this experiment was one that includes LBO workers in a broad set of occupations. So it ranges from marketing to manufacturing, not only IT, and they want to quantify the extent to which the different jobs require IT complementary skills. Also wanted to see and wanted to realize, and what they found was that LBOs are associated with differences in workers' long-run career paths. For example, workers who perform IT complementary tasks experience shorter unemployment spells immediately after separating from an acquired firm. These workers are also more likely to transition to companies that have demand for IT complementary human capital. These transitions appear to be incentivized, for the most part, by wage concerns, and the data that was shown in the report actually indicates that LBO workers who were able to perform the jobs that are transformed by IT earning or IT companies actually earn higher long-run wages than those who cannot. Thus, overall, these findings support that PE-led IT investments actually have improved the long-run career prospects for many employees of those individuals at the acquired firm. That being said, there are also numerous other studies in cases that they use that really allow you to understand how an LBO candidate is chosen, but not only chosen, but how an LBO candidate can affect the overall well-being of the company. So they also discussed whether high-quality LBO employees search for jobs at higher rates, and if they're more likely to enter our resume sample than high-quality non-LBO employees. So in such differences in sample selection, they really wanted to look at LBO versus non-LBO once again. The data indicates that the distribution of individual traits are very similar amongst both of the groups, and moreover, the distributions of worker characteristics for people that are employed by LBO firms versus after an acquisition look extremely similar. So that being said, the collective set of facts supporting the hypothesis that PE investments can have spillover effects on workers actually is true. And so there were two counter arguments, but this lesson in hindsight is of particular importance because during periods of rapid technological progress, a lot of technological advancements render obsolete, and the business process used by many firms has to be altered significantly. These alterations, really require a lot of manpower and can actually lead to the cutting of many jobs. We also look at the study and lessons learned by disparate literatures, and look at how transformed how PEIT acquisitions are transformed throughout the process. The first source of information actually comes from an online job website focused on the U.S. labor market. The website allows for a platform of two-sided matching between job seekers and companies. The job seekers post their resumes on the website to look for jobs, whereas employers search through the resumes on the website to identify good job candidates. Individual job seekers voluntarily provide information about their background and employment histories to the website through their resumes by entering information in the standardized fields. We standardize each employment spell listed on the person's resume by classifying the occupation held by the individual, in accordance with the U.S. Department of Labor Occupational Classification (SOC) system. Table 1 presents some statistics that were very interesting. So it seems as though, in hindsight, the distribution of employment across industries for our sample is compared with that of the U.S. labor force in panel C. So industry classifications for the employees in our sample are different. The span of industries resembles that of the total workforce, which is extremely important when looking at a sample. You really want it to emulate what you're seeing in the real world because that allows you to get proper data. The empirical framework that we use. So to test whether PE investments in IT can have spillover effects on workers, we examine the career paths of individuals in our sample using the nearest neighbor matching estimator. This hypothesis predicts that LBO-led IT affects many individual workers at target firms by transforming their work activities and incentivizing them to acquire more skills to perform these tasks in a better manner. In turn, the acquisition of these skills has a positive effect on workers' labor market outcomes, such as long-run employability and wages. The ideal experiment for testing our hypothesis would be to measure the long-run labor market outcomes of an individual employed by a target firm at the time of an LBO. And then you compare these to the outcomes of the counterfactual outcomes that would have been realized in the absence of an LBO. More specifically, we would divide our sample of workers into treatment and control groups based on the following criteria. The person's resume indicates that the individual is employed by a firm at the time that gets acquired by the LBO, similar to what we had before, or the worker who was treated otherwise, who was part of the control group. We looked at several, and they looked at several market outcomes as dependent variables in our analysis. The primary outcome that we examine is a worker's long-run employability, measured by a fraction of time that an individual is employed by his or her observed career, potentially across several firms. Our measure of long-run employment duration is inherently right-censored because we do not observe career paths after the most recent resume update by an individual. One of the advantages of using this empirical context is that the data contains a large sample of non-LBO workers who closely resemble individuals in treatment group, which supports our identification assumption in this case. One of the limitations, however, is that LBOs are non-random events. The validity of our identification and of the identification assumption thus depends on the ability to control for the variables that matter for explaining long-run labor market outcomes. You literally cannot predict when an LBO is going to occur. Therefore, it is extremely difficult for one to try and make a set of assumptions based on when an LBO is going to happen, how an LBO is going to happen, etc. Taken together with worker distributions, there's a broad sway of worker types across the different LBOs. There are people from IT to manufacturing to marketing to consumer products, consumer retail. Every single business type can go through an LBO at any point. It's really just about the feasibility of the LBO and the willingness that the management and of the LBO company to really make it work. The interaction term. So one of the other interesting things was that employer transition. So the hypothesis predicts that LBO workers who acquire IT complementary skills should be more likely to transition to companies that have demand for these skills. To characterize the nature of employer transitions in the data, we estimate the following. So they estimated essentially that the dependent variable was whether the firm's IT labor rate hiring is higher than the digit average, or the industry average, and that basically led into the average time or that person was looking for a job. Looking at wages, they also wanted to understand how people's wages would increase or would be incentivized should they decide to, or should a private equity company decide to invest. So are people's wages going to go up versus down? And that's really one of the big things that we're looking at in this case. And now the interesting part is that compensation might go up. However, the likelihood of them keeping jobs might actually go down. So a lot of times private equity firms will cut the low-ranking employees or the bottom 10%, 15%, which is what we hear a lot in investment banking, and retain those who are more productive. But in doing that, they will reward those who are more productive with higher salaries. They do want to ultimately cut costs, so that could be, it might not work out, but for the majority of the cases, given the data, it seems as though that's the case. That's very interesting, given that most private equity firms are looking to increase that net income number. In conclusion, they constructed and analyzed a novel employer-employee matching data set to measure the effect of PE spillovers on workers in context of the rapid IT advancements that characterize much of the last decade. The findings suggest that PE may benefit the employment prospects of workers who are otherwise limited by their exposure to outdated production materials or methods. In particular, they believe that it is important to assess the extent to which PE more broadly plays a role in influencing the diffusion of new production technologies across firms. In hindsight, I believe that this was a very interesting article. Given that I'm working in PE this summer, I believe that this will be a great opportunity for me to understand how PE firms really look to change their workforce and labor force upon purchasing of a new company. Once again, my article was Private Equity and Workers' Career Paths, The Role of Technological Change by Ashwini Agarwal and Prasanna Tambi, one from London School of Economics and Political Science and one from Stern School of Business, respectively. Thank you again. My name is Devin Smith, a junior business finance major at Morehouse College. Thank you.